Good morning and welcome to our live webinar, Leveraging the Charity Navigator's Rating System to Promote Donor Trust and Contributions, hosted by PKF O'Connor Davies. All attendees are in listen mode only. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items so you know how to participate in today's call. We've taken a screenshot of the attendee interface, and you should see something that looks like this on your own computer desktop in the upper right corner. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the webcast. We have a lot of material to cover, and if time permits, we will make an effort to respond. If we cannot get to your questions, a response will be sent post-event. A copy of the PowerPoint slides and a recording of today's webinar will be made available to you via email a few hours after the event. At the end of the webinar, we do have a very short survey which will be prompted, and your response is greatly appreciated. At this time, I would like to introduce Eva Mrouk, partner of our Exempt Organization Tax and Advisory Services Group with PKF O'Connor Davies. Eva?
Good morning and a warm welcome to everyone. We extend our sincere appreciation for attending our event. I am Eva Mrouk, the host of this program. I am a tax partner at PKF O'Connor Davies. Our firm services 4,000 not-for-profit organizations. We provide audit, tax, and advisory services. Our team of experts roll their sleeves and work on 990s each and every day. It's no secret that the Form 990 is an important public document. And it is said that it's usually the first document a potential donor looks at to learn more about a not-for-profit and making informed decisions. Charity Navigator is a powerful platform for donors with access to data tools and resources. And we have an exciting program in store for the next hour or so. Our speaker will share valuable information about their rating system and show how your not-for-profit can reach 4 stars. Our speaker is the Chief Program Officer at Charity Navigator, a nonprofit executive, a champion with a stellar 20-year record in program planning, evaluation, and implementation, is passionate about philanthropy and making an impact. Please join me in welcoming Laura Endies.
Thank you so much, Ava, and everyone at PKF O'Connor Davies. It's really exciting to be here to talk to all of you and share about Charity Navigator. We're excited to sort of walk through some of the changes that we've undergone over the past 3 years. If you haven't been paying attention, the rating system has actually evolved quite a bit. The ins and outs of our rating system and some changes that are coming on September 18th. So timing is great to give a little bit of a sneak peek of how our rating system has changed. And then how a strong Charity Navigator rating system can convey trust to your donors. I really want to emphasize that a lot of the rating and a successful rating comes down to a partnership with your accountant when you complete your 990. That still is a core document within our rating system, and you'll hear about that a little bit more. But you and your accountant can work together to create a very accurate 990 that puts your best foot forward. And you'll see that on the Charity Navigator website. I'm excited to talk to you all. So next slide. I do like to get a sense of the audience. So it would be great if you could take a moment and just tell me if you've used Charity Navigator before, sort of what's your familiarity. You might be using it as a donor yourself to find charities that you want to give to, or you might be looking up the score for the organization you work with, or some variation of the two. So it'd be great if you could just choose your familiarity with it, and then we can tailor the presentation to our audience. To share the results. Okay. Oh, great. Okay, I use it occasionally. I've never used it. I use it regularly. This is great. Thank you so much for sharing this. All right, next slide. Excuse me. So who is Charity Navigator? For those of you who say you've never used it, we are actually the largest not-for-profit charity rating platform in the country. We rate over 200,000 organizations, so your organization is likely on it, even if you didn't know it. And our mission is really about impactful giving easier for all. And I get a lot of questions about that mission. People say, well, what are your rating organization? Aren't you just, isn't that your mission? And I would say that the majority of the people at Charity Navigator get up to find, with the goal of finding the best higher performing charities and helping donors find those charities so that we're making those connections. So we're not just a rating platform, we're actually a giving platform and a charity recommender platform as well. Through our giving basket, we have around 45 million flowing through every year, and we get about 15 million visitors a year. So a lot of people are looking at our site to find their perfect charity. Next slide. Let's talk about who those users are. We actually have a lot of different users, and I like to highlight this because not everyone sort of knows how things might be, their information might be used. The first is, as you all know, small individual donors, your neighbor up the street might be looking at Charity Navigator to inform their giving decisions. We have several donors similar to Debbie below. She gives $5,000 to $10,000 a year, and she uses Charity Navigator to inform that giving. We also have a lot of foundation and grant makers, particularly small foundations, who use us for due diligence. So they might get 100 applications and they just do it for an initial screen. Only 3- and 4-star charities move on to their sort of review stage. We also have a lot of staff at institutional DAFs. This is where the high net worth donors typically put their money. And they have researchers on staff who help them find charities. And I'm in regular contact with several of those researchers who say, I use Charity Navigator a lot to inform my recommendations to these high net worth donors. So there's a lot of eyeballs on the sites, from very small, your $50 donor to potentially big ticket donors. And we have had many stories of nonprofits coming to us and saying, hey, we got this unexpected $20,000 gift. And when we asked, it was because they found us on Charity Navigator. Next slide.
Laura, if I may just add two things on this. There's also other tax-exempt organizations with similar mission and similar size, scoping out 990s, looking at returns, benchmarking industry standards, especially for executive compensation. So that's what we see them using 990s. Also the media, members of the media, their focus usually is on compensation and program expenses, just ensuring that the charity is using it for charitable purposes. And journalists love to use the 990 to uncover wrongdoing. We hope not, but misuse of funds, bribery, and kickback schemes are often in the news. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and one feature that I didn't talk about, but we do have alerts on our system that flags if a charity is fraudulent, and we work very closely with journalists on that, and we have really good relationships with some of like the New York Times and otherwise to help with their efforts. So the media definitely uses our site as well. Thanks. All right, so let's talk and really dive into how we rate them, and then I'll give you a sneak peek to some of the changes that are coming. All right, so next slide. Just high level, we give out a 0 to 4-star rating. So we say a 3 or a 4-star is a good or a great charity, and that is a charity that if someone, my neighbor asked me, should I give to a 3-star charity? I say, absolutely, you can give with confidence to a 3- and 4-star charity. Our rating, which I'll talk about a little bit more, is sort of an aggregation of 4 different domains, which we call beacons, and you can see them on the right. And I'll talk through those in a little bit. So we combine all that information to create one high overarching 0 to 4-star for a charity. Next slide. All right, so who gets to be rated? I get this question all the time. We only rate 501c3s. So we do have 501c4s on our site, but they're typically not rated. And in order to be eligible, you have to have 3 consecutive years of filing the IRS Form 990. So this means you have, about 200,000 in revenue each year, and it has to be the full 990, not the other, 990 postcard or EZ. And we don't rate private foundations, so not 990 PFs. This translates into about 207,000 organizations that are rated sort of through no action of their own. Their rating just is automatically on our website, and then they have opportunities to build on that rating I'll talk about in a second.
Laura, just a question. Is it safe to assume that private foundations, 990 PFs aren't rated because that's a different animal, and 990Ns and EZs aren't rated because it's hard to compare apples to apples and lack of information?
Yeah, exactly. The PF is a totally different animal, right? And they're typically not taking large public donations. They can get donations, but it's a little bit different. And then we pull so much information from the 990N and that's not on the 990N or EZ. And also some of these small organizations, they're really getting up and going. And our rating system really is for a little bit more of an established organization. So we're not sure our rating system would be fair to what are typically smaller and newer organizations that are just sort of getting their systems in place. So that's a great question. All right, next slide. So we, as I said, we do have a combination of 4 different areas that we call beacons. You'll see that, the navigation theme here that comprises how we rate. So it's impact and results, accountability and finance, that's your 990 section, leadership and adaptability, and culture and community. And we think together this provides a really comprehensive analysis of charity performance across all 4 key domains. So if you, looked at Charity Navigator 3 years ago, this might seem very different. Up until 2020, we only rated on accountability and finance. So it was really based on your 990, and it was based on, it was really a measure of financial health and financial sustainability and governance. After lots of research and consultation, we've added these other beacons so we can show a really holistic view of your charity, and you can really round out the story on our site of how you want, what you want donors to know about your charity that's beyond just the financial metrics. So I'll talk about that a little bit later, but it might seem very different for those of you who haven't paid attention to how we've morphed in our rating system. Next slide. So how do you get assessed by each beacon? This is a super high level overview. As I said, we still do use the IRS Form 990, and that is the basis for the accountability and finance beacon. That's publicly available data, so it's easy for us to pull. And that is sort of the foundational beacon that we build off. So almost every organization on our site has an accountability and finance rating that they got automatically based on their 990. From there, we've layered on these other beacons where you can make a choice to submit additional data through our nonprofit portal or through Candid. They're typically really brief assessments that you can fill out and get a rating on each of these areas. Culture and community, it's on the Candid GuideStar profile that we pull that data. And then for impact and results, this is actually a little bit more limited because it's very hard to rate on impact and results, and we're very careful, so we can only do it for a limited set of programs. But that has a series of specific data points that you would submit for your program. Now, if you don't have these other beacons, it doesn't hurt you. You can still rest on your accountability and finance score and just have that be your Charity Navigator rating. I will say I think it's a missed opportunity to round out your score and tell your donors something a little bit different about your organization than just the financial metrics. Next slide. All right, so that's a lot. I typically think it's a really good idea to ground what you're learning in your own score. So if you're a charity, I would recommend you take a moment and go over to charitynavigator.com or .org, sorry, and you can find the search and you put in your EIN and find your charity and just pull it up. And then you'll have it as we go through, and I'm hoping that that will make this all make more sense. And if you have questions as we go, please put them in the question box. I'll try to answer them, if I can, and then we'll take specific questions at the end. So hopefully you've got your rating up. I think you should see, your 0 to 4-star rating and which beacons you've earned. Next slide. So your rating maybe looks something like this. So here are 2 examples. The first on the left is a 93. It's a 4-star charity, and they've earned 2 beacons. They automatically got their accountability and finance beacon, and then they logged on to our portal and earned the leadership and adaptability and told us about their leadership best practices. Those 2 scores are weighted together. So accountability was worth 90% of the score, leadership and adaptability is worth 10%, and that's how their 93 came. On the right, we have a 4-star perfect charity, and we do have a perfect charities list. It's our most widely used list. So this is an example of that. So they've earned all 4 beacons. They have 100 out of 100 and a 4-star charity. And they also have a weighted average, but the weighting looks a little bit different, with 50% coming from impact and results. So at the end of the day, that is what everyone cares about. Are you impactful? And then the other beacons are as followed. Now again, if you look on the left, you're not harmed by not having impact in results or culture and community. They're just not factored in. Now, we did a big survey when we were rolling this out of donors. And what we found, which is really interesting, and I like to share because it's a surprising result, is of 2,000 donors, they said that they would rather donate to an organization with more beacons because they thought that showed better trust, even if it was a 3-star. So I've heard a lot of charities saying, I don't want to hurt my score by providing additional information. The donors are telling us that they would rather have the more information, even if it hurts your score a little bit. That's what transparency really matters. So I'm just sharing that as food for thought, and we can talk about it more as we go on. Next slide. All right, so let's dig really into the beacon accountability and finance. It still is our most foundational beacon, and it's the one everybody is automatically rated on. And it's the one that, as I said, is really about a partnership with your accountant to put your best foot forward on your 990 and make sure your 990 tells a very accurate and complete story. So next slide. So as I've said, it's rated based on when you have 3 Form 990s filed. And it really has 2 parts. The first part is financial health and sustainability. And the second part is governance, accountability, and transparency. These are all taken from your 990 and in some cases from your website. And we didn't come up with these best practices. This was the IRS a few years ago, revamped the whole 990 and really put out new sections that were to promote best practices in the nonprofit sector. And we're really leveraging what the IRS and the industry itself said was things that a great nonprofit should do. And so we're taking that data and just putting it in a way that's easy to understand and digestible. So we have these 2 parts, and then we take those point allocations and we allocate points based on the evidence base, based on best practices and the agreed upon best industry standards. And you can kind of see an example on your left of what that looks like. Next slide. We understand that the nonprofit sector is actually fairly complex, and there are different business models and characteristics that might make your 990 look a little bit different than a different organization. So we do tailor how you're assessed based on some characteristics. We look at size. So bigger organizations have more metrics, and we look at some characteristics. Are you a grant maker? Your 990 is going to look a little bit different. Are you non-cash? So you're a food bank. You get a lot of in-kind donations. Your 990 is going to be a little different. And we adjust the metrics and even what the scoring is based on those nuances. And starting on September 18th, we're adding more categories and more sizes so that we've got greater accuracy and nuance in our ratings. Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure we're putting an accurate rating out on as well. I have to be able to stand behind our product. Next slide. All right, so this is a little bit more detail of the chart is way more complicated than this, but this is the high level. So if you're a $50 million org and you're 40% donor supported, you're evaluated on all of our metrics. So all 18 accountability metrics and all 4 financial metrics. However, if you're fairly small, you're less than 2 million, or you don't get that much donor support, we only evaluate on 2 financial metrics and 10 accountability metrics. And then there's sort of a middle ground of that 20 to 50 million. We also have, as I said, other characteristics that we've put in play, but you can see it is scaled based on size. Newer organizations are still getting their feet, or smaller organizations are still getting their feet under them. And so some of the accountability metrics are maybe aspirational versus something that they actually need to be adhering to. Next slide. Okay, so let's talk about what those accountability metrics are. There are 17, but I did want to highlight the most important, and they are weighted by most important. So the key thing is that audit and that independent board and material diversion of assets. You'll hear me say this is where people lose the most points. And they're just really best practices. In some cases, they're even law. So let's talk about audit. If you are over $1 million, we require that you do an annual audit. That is in line with most states, and in some cases actually even higher than the state threshold. Ava, I think you were saying that they just changed to $1 million, but it used to be 750,000 in some of the tri-state area. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
Yes. Yes. So audited financial statements, you need to indicate that you have an audit, and you also need to indicate that you have an audit committee as part of your board that's looking at that audit. Lots of organizations, choose not to do an audit. They will lose points on Charity Navigator for that because it is so important. The second one is material diversion of assets. If you indicate that on your 990, you do lose points. It's very uncommon because most organizations are trustworthy, but that is something donors care about. And then the last is independent board of directors. I think that most large organizations sort of know they need to have a majority independent board, but we have smaller, newer organizations and it's all staff. And so honestly, sometimes their Charity Navigator rating is the first time that they realize that they're supposed to have an independent board. So those are the 3. Then we have other policies, whistleblower policy, record retention policy, board meeting minutes, etc. And whether or not your 990 is listed on your website. Those are kind of the next key ones that are a checkbox. And then for the largest, biggest category, the 50 million, 40% donor supported, we do ask that you have stuff on your website for transparency. So that's your 990 should be on your website. And we look and we verify your audit is made available, you have your key staff and board of directors listed, and you have a donor privacy policy. So this is, again, really where that partnership with your accountant comes in, walking through and making sure that you're accurately conveying that you have all of these great best practices. And I believe, Ava, if you don't, they can even help you find resources and examples so you can put them in place.
Sure. On the material diversion of assets, I should say if your not-for-profit is checking yes on the 990, it has bigger problems. It could be embezzlement and theft is common. To check that question, yes, but there's correction measures. The issue there with material diversion of assets is it could be in private endowment or excess benefit transactions. So bigger problems if you're checking yes.
Yeah.
And also on the being listed on the website, just ensure that the 990 that's posted on the website is the one that's not disclosing the contributions on Schedule B. So it's a public inspection copy, and also to have the current copy posted. We've seen a lot of not-for-profits have a very old CL1 on their website. So just to stay current, just a few.
Those are great tips. Great tips. All right, next slide. So here is all of the gory details of where, for those of you who want to know exactly where we take it from, most of our metrics come from part 1, the summary, the checklist of required schedules. Section A, governing body and management, that's where we get the independent board, and policies, that's where whistleblower, retention, document, etc. And then financial statements and reporting is where the audits are. So again, I'll actually send Ava and her team like a document that has exactly where everything is, and you can just crank through it with your accountant, as well as all the other fields, because everything's important on the 990. These are just the ones that are rated. As I said, most common reason an organization scores poorly on this, the majority of the board is not independent, they didn't indicate an audit. And then sometimes it's just, for lack of a better term, like a little bit sloppy. They just forget to check the box that says they have a conflict of interest or a whistleblower policy. And Ava, yesterday or earlier today, you were sort of asking, well, what about amended? You can't, that's our usually answer when we say, oh, I just forgot, I have it. We ask you to amend your 990. But the IRS kind of deprioritizes the amended 990s. And so we may not get the copy because we get our data directly from the IRS for a while. And so it's just best to always put in the most accurate 990 first. Just pause a beat before you sign on that line and make sure you go through everything really carefully.
Right, and then even before COVID, posting the 990, the data was posted within 1.5 to 2 years after calendar year. But with the pandemic and all the closures and it slowed down the IRS, there's a bit of barrier to data until the IRS is able to get their feet out of the water and clear their backlog.
Yeah, they have really sped up in the last like sort of 3 months. They're posting a lot of the old 990s, but they're not including those amended. They just really deprioritize those. Mm-hmm. So it's a good reason just to, for many reasons, Charity Navigator amongst one of them, just to make sure that you don't need to go through that amendment process.
Yeah, and just 1 or 2 more points. What we're looking at the screen here, this is the governance section of the Form 990. Many of on the call may remember pre-2008, before the 990 was redesigned, it was generally, the 990 was just a numerical document, and the IRS added all of these governance type questions. It believes that an organization that shows strong governance will be more compliant, more trustworthy to the public. But the IRS viewed this section as the crown jewel. They were so proud of implementing this. Some of the questions in section B on the policies, our advice is if you adopt a policy, adopt it, but also implement it and follow it, and not just to say you have a policy just to check the box. So it really needs to be reviewed annually, followed, implemented, monitored, and so on.
100%. Great advice. All right, next slide. Financial metrics. This is usually where people are most interested. What are those financial metrics? So for most organizations, there's only 2, and they're looking at sorry, let me back up. We sort of try to measure 2 things, financial efficiency and financial capacity. It's really about, are you efficient with your dollars, and then are you sustainable? And for most organizations, that come down to 2 metrics, program expense ratio and liabilities to assets. If you're one of those bigger organizations, you're gonna have all 4, and that's gonna include fundraising efficiency ratio and working capital ratio. All right, so let's talk about program expense. This is not a race to the bottom. Higher program expense, we have a threshold, it's 70% to pass. So you can have 30%, overhead as they call it. And if you have 85%, you do not get more points. This is a change that we're implementing as of September 18th, so this might feel new to you. It's just as long as you are at 70% program expense, you get full credit. We really think it's an important, but not the most important metric for Charity Navigator. And actually it comprises, if you have all 4 beacons, it's like 2% of your score. So I get a lot of questions about, oh, I want to invest in, some capital expense or a new software system, or we want to hire an HR person. The vast majority of organizations have 70% or more program expense, even with robust M&A costs. And we actually are deprioritizing it even more. We used to have sort of a couple of different versions of it. So we had fundraising expense, admin expense, and program expense growth. We're eliminating those as of September 18th. Again, it's in our effort to de-emphasize program expense ratio in our ratings, and so a donor can look at a lot more things. And we also remove program expense growth because that might not be what your organization is trying to do. You might not be trying to grow your program. You might be in a sort of a steady state and you're just trying to improve the quality of your program. So we didn't think that was fair to continue to punish organizations for that. I hope that's good news to you all. And then we also have liabilities to assets and working capital. Again, those are also just thresholds you have to pass. So higher or exceeding those thresholds doesn't help you, and they're slightly varied by cause and size. So you can find out those on our website after September 18th. Okay, next slide. Again, for those of you who want all the nitty-gritty, here's exactly where we calculate from where on the Form 990. I will mention we use a 3-year average. And that is because we know that, people have unusual years or have to make adjustments from year to year. And so a 3-year average does smooth out those scores and makes it more sort of stable. And so one year or one change in how you do things isn't going to affect your score. So here's all the nitty-gritty details. You can see them in the slide, and this is if you want to know exactly how we calculate it. This is it. Next slide. What about the pandemic? We just lived through a historic time. I think that's an understatement. And the pandemic really affected the nonprofit sector. Some had to shut their doors for a year. Others actually had like banner years because they happened to be in a sector that, was sort of at the front lines of the COVID response. So it really depends. And we didn't want what was truly an endogenous event to affect a charity's rating. So this is sort of our one-time gift to the whole sector, which is if your charity experienced in 2019 or 2020 a 9% or greater drop in revenue compared to 2019, we sort of think you had an unusual year, and we're just dropping it from the rating, and the rating will be calculated using the 3 most recent. So in this example, 2020 was an unusual year for this charity. They had a large revenue drop. We will drop that weird year so it doesn't affect their score and use 2019, 2021, and 2022. So hopefully that will alleviate any of you who are sitting there thinking, oh gosh, a 3-year average, like 2020 was terrible for us. You don't have to do anything, it just will automatically get dropped. Next slide. All right, so that is finance and accountability. I know it's a lot. I think these slides will be shared and they'll stay on for questions. That does create our foundational beacon, but we have other beacons. And here's where I always say it's an opportunity for you to tell a broader story about your charity. So if you're like, I just don't think what you rate in accountability and finance represents what I do, you're in luck. There are other ways to tell your story. So the first way is the leadership and adaptability beacon. This is a place where you can talk about your leadership strategy and operations. If you log into our portal, there is a very short questionnaire that asks you about your mission, your vision, your strategic goals, leadership development, and if you have a culture of learning and adaptability. At this point, completion gives you 100 out of 100 on this beacon. Because right now we're just trying to promote transparency in this beacon, and give that fuller story. So if you fill this out, you've got a great opportunity to tell a donor about your strategic plan, or we have a place where you can enter an adaptability story and share how you learned something and changed your program based on your culture of learning. I get to read a lot of those stories. Some of them are just fantastic, either from the COVID pandemic, or recently they did an evaluation and they learned that they, how to make their program better. There's just it's a great place for you to share that broader story. So
I think it's great. I think it's great that Charity Navigator just doesn't look at the numbers and looking at other things, because the 990 is not just a number document. There are words, and the words are just as important. I often ask why the 990 doesn't have pictures, because pictures speak 1,000 words. Having a construction to a hospital wing, or a shelter built for the homeless, but that's what I guess the websites are for. So yeah, the 990 is not just a number document. It is the narratives and the words are just as important.
Great. Okay. All right. Next slide is culture and community. And this is actually information that we get through a partnership with GuideStar Candid. So many of you might complete your GuideStar profile. And in there, you'll see at the bottom, it's an additional section. There's 2 different sections, how we listen and equity strategies. And we pull that data in, and you will get scored on it in this beacon. So culture and community is really about showing your organizational health, your commitment to equity, and your commitment to getting feedback from whoever you serve. There's a lot of evidence that says constituent feedback, or like asking people you serve what they think of the program or how to improve, actually is really linked to quality. It kind of makes sense, right? If you're asking the people you serve how to make the program better, you're probably gonna have a better program. So there's a very quick checklist in Candid, and you can share how you do that. And then we also have an equity strategies checklist that shows 14 different best practices in promoting equity. And if you can just check the ones that you are implementing as a program, and the more you check, the more points that you get in our score. So again, if these are areas that are important for you and you really shine, like this is a great way, again, to fill out that story for your donors. All right, next slide. And the last and final is impact and results. So if you are scored on impact and results, it's 50% of your score. So it means a lot, because at the end of the day, I think that's why all nonprofits are in business, to have an impact in a cause of their choice. And we asked sort of 2 questions through this analysis. Is the nonprofit achieving its mission? And is this nonprofit achieving its mission in a way that's cost effective? So we actually do a very individual review of your nonprofit based on information that we have. We have an algorithm that will take data that you submit through, and it will answer these questions and sort of give you a score of very cost effective, or not cost effective. And this, is an amazing way to get basically a free external evaluation. Now, this is hard to do. So we've got several PhDs on staff working through how to do this accurately, and we're building it out for each program. So right now we have about 20 odd programs, and you can see them on the right. So if you work in one of those programs, you're eligible for an impact and results, and you can log into our portal, and there'll be a series of very specific questions for your program of commonly collected data points that you would submit to us. And then in a couple weeks, you'd get this sort of external evaluation of your cost effectiveness in your sector. So, especially for small organizations, this is a great way to get validation that the work you're doing is effective. If you are not on this program list, we are building them out, but you're not harmed if you can't get a rating. We are, we're limited based on the areas that we can rate right now. So you're just sort of a not applicable. It doesn't hurt you, but we are trying to build these out, and we are looking for more expansive ways so more organizations can show that they're impactful and have results. So again, limited eligibility at this time, but a great way of you working one of these programs to demonstrate your results to donors and for you to understand how your organization is doing. Okay, next slide. Okay, just a little plug that we are, in the midst of publishing new ratings based on some changes to our methodology. And if you want to see, you can look at what your rating is today, but if you want to see what it's going to be on September 18th, you can log on to our portal and you'll get a preview, a little sneak peek of what your score will be. And if you haven't completed these beacons, that's the place where you can go in and you can click on leadership and adaptability or impacting results and submit additional information so you can round out your story. Next slide. Okay, I get a lot of questions like, I'm a busy nonprofit and I've worked in the nonprofit sector for 20 years. Like I know all of the competition for our time and attention. So I get the question like, is it really worth it? I've got a 93 on just ANF. Should I bother with any of the other beacons? Should I care about this at all? And the evidence says yes. So first of all, if you are a 3 or 4 star rated charity and you have multiple beacons, we prioritize you on our best charities list and on our recommendations. We do a lot of recommendations externally, and then we do recommendations for other groups that are looking for recommendations for charities and causes. So we won't recommend you unless you are a well-rounded, high-performing charity. And also, we found that organizations have more donations to our giving basket for each beacon that they earn, and being on a recommended charity list translates to as much as $10,000 per year in additional donations. We also had a researcher who did her PhD thesis on Charity Navigator, and she found that an increase in the charity rating from 3 to 4 star is associated with a 6% rise in contribution. And that's organization-wide, not just through our giving basket. So it is, I think it is worth it. And I think it's a great way to tell your story. I mean, you do it once, you can put the badge on your website, and it's sort of, it will hopefully be the gift that keeps on giving. So next slide. I think I'm at the end. These are just other places you can get resources, our nonprofit resource page. We have our portal. There's a blog that I can send out that talks more about the details of our methodological changes that we're implementing on September 18th. But now here's a chance I would love to hear what questions you have. There have been a few in the chat. It's been hard for me to multitask. But here's a chance where I'd love to hear what's on your mind, what you're concerned about, and sort of what you want to know more about. And Ava, anything you want to say before we move over to Q&A?
Excellent information, informative. There are a number of questions coming in through our panel. I guess I could read through with time permitting. Laura, I'm not sure if you had a chance to look at the questions, but I do see one here. Does a charity submit an application to be rated, or are they rated automatically?
If you have 3 990s e-filed, you are rated, you get that beacon automatically. So, this is where if you're kind of on that bubble and you're a small organization and maybe you sometimes file the 990, sometimes you file the 990 easy, that's a great conversation to have with your accountant at tax timely, because I think you can always file the full 990 if you want, right? But it's a moment to say, like, are we kind of ready for the full 990? And once you do, you will be rated. So you could probably pre-calculate. I mean, our methodology is 100% public. You could pre-calculate your rating if you wanted to help answer that question.
Here is another question. Earlier, Laura had said that the 990s only get rated. We are a growing new not-for-profit, and transparency is extremely important to us. We qualify for the short form 990 easy, but choose to file the full form. So I don't see a question here. I think it's more of a comment from our audience.
Yeah.
So we could just speak what Laura had just said. a not-for-profit can voluntarily file whatever form they want to. They can always go on the Form 990. There's pros and cons to that because of professional fees, but it does offer transparency, visibility, trust to the donors, and that may outweigh the rewards. We're also seeing a number of religious organizations who statutorily are exempt from filing the Form 990, filing the 990. It's mostly for fundraising purposes, but
Yeah.
we are seeing an influx of that.
Yeah, and that's a question here. Many faith-based organizations don't file the 990. What do you do to evaluate them? We just don't have a way, unfortunately. So, they're making that choice, and that sort of means that they can't be rated on Charity Navigator. We just don't have the capacity to sort of come up with a different methodology if they don't have a 990. Yeah. See, I'm trying to find all of the questions here.
How about this one? How is Charity Navigator funded? So Charity Navigator actually files a 990.
Yeah, you can see our 990, and we actually, because our ratings are automatic, we rate ourselves. So you can see, and we haven't always been we're mostly always a 4-star, but I think that there's a dark year in like 2016 or something where we weren't. So yeah, we file 990. We are actually we're sort of a Wikipedia model, to be honest. So if you've used Wikipedia, it's free, but then they say, would you like to donate? Like, that's our model. So when people donate through our website, we ask for a tip, and that's what pays my salary. That, and we get foundations also give us money as well. So in some ways, we are in the same game you all are of trying to keep our doors open through fundraising, just a slightly different model.
Good question.
Sorry, the questions are looking kind of funny on my side. So if you could help me read some off, I'd appreciate that. If there's any.
I have another one. How can we update the Form 990 information since the last on Charity Navigator is 2020? Is it reliant on IRS, or can the not-for-profit submit the latest one?
Well, that is when, if you go up on September 18th, it will be updated. So we do data updates every 2 months based on the data available from the 990s on the IRS. And thank you, IRS. They dumped about 500,000 in our lap late this summer. So we have been working literally day and night to process all of those. So that's why September 18th is kind of a big day for us, because we're tweaking our methodology a little bit, and we're getting all this fresh data from the IRS. So again, go to the portal, log on, and you will see what your score will look like on September 18th. I know almost 100% have their through 2021 now, and if you're a July filer for 2022, we probably have your 990 now if you filed it. If you file in 2022, your calendar year goes through, or your fiscal year goes through December, you may or may not have filed it. So yeah, a lot of new data, and that's why we put in that pandemic adjustment, because we got all this new data and we thought, oh, some funny things happened in 2020, and we knew this and we've been planning for it. So that's why, if you're worried about that 2020 990 coming through because you had a big revenue drop, it probably isn't being included. Here's a good question I can see is, what is the relationship between Candid and GuideStar? So we are 2 nonprofits. We're both trying to promote transparency in the sector. So we do have data sharing relationships, and that's sort of the extent of it. So they share with us some of the data that they collect through the profile, and we share 990s that we don't have, but we are separate organizations. Hopefully that answered your question. Let's see.
Here's another one. What time of the day will the updated scores be announced? And will it be clear in the portal that it is the updated score?
We usually, it's sort of middle of the day. I don't know if there's a specific time on September 18th. Middle of the day is usually when we get it done because we check a few things before we do live. It's a Monday, and I hope it will be clear. If it's not, my email will be here after because I'd love to know if it's not clear to you, because that's something I want to make better. I want there to be a lot of clarity on your end about what your score is and where you're missing points. And I know sometimes we haven't been perfect at that. So I think the next slide actually has my email. You're welcome to email me directly. And we'll probably send out an announcement saying that you can go look at your scores.
One more question. Any advice on how a public charity can improve its program expense percentage? Good question. We could speak about this for a while, Laura.
Yeah. Okay, so I would say if you are 70%, don't. 70% and higher is full credit. Overhead is important. I need HR, I need computer systems. All the things that go into overhead are actually part of what might make your organization successful. So I think if you're below 70%, I will tell you you're quite an outlier. We look at this data really carefully, and that might be something to have a conversation with your accountant about is, are you allocating those costs correctly? That's not something I can advise you on, but I will say, we actually talked about, we didn't do this, so, should we actually start docking points when people have too little overhead? We had that conversation. We didn't go down that path, but we do want to signal that overhead is important, and as long as you're spending 70% or more on a program, like, that's great. Hopefully, I'd be curious if that answers your question.
I'll add a few thoughts there. So the Form 990, the functional expense Part 9 generally follows the audited financial statements. So it's important to review the expense methodologies used there. So the IRS asks for a breakout of compensation. So compensation of officers, employee benefits, payroll. A close review of that should be looked at to see if any of the compensation is misclassified. Usually the CEO or the director of finance just defaults automatically to M&G, a management and general type expenditure. Well, they may be, in fact, have some duties that are programmatic, and some of that could be shifted to the left. Also, fees for professional services is another area. It's so easy to report accounting and legal fees as M&G, when in fact, a part of it may be programmatic. So just some thoughts there.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm not an accountant. So again, these are really great questions to talk to your PKAF, O'Connor Davies accountant, or whoever you use. They can help advise you and what is, make sure you're doing those appropriately. But please don't try to limit your overhead for your Charity Navigator rating.
Another question, are having conflict of interest, document destruction, whistleblower policies mandatory? And part 2 is, are there any other policies that a not-for-profit should implement?
Yeah, why don't you take that one?
Sure. So generally, policies are not required under the IRS regulations. They're more under state laws. But it is a sign of very, very good, strong governance to have these policies. Other policies that a not-for-profit may want to implement is a gift acceptance policy. Now with cryptocurrency donations, very popular, we're seeing gift acceptance policies being implemented by not-for-profits.
Those are great questions. Let's see. I see one about GuideStar and Candid. Does the nonprofit need to establish accounts with them? You do need to establish an account with GuideStar Candid. I think they said that they have like 700,000 account holders, so we almost assume that everyone has one. And to update culture and community. Leadership and adaptability, you can log on to our portal and do that directly. And actually there's a link back to Candid from our portal if you want to start there. It's a good question. Let's see. Anything else here? I think we've answered all the questions, haven't we?
It seems so.
Great. Well, right, so.
We thank you all for being here with us. We thank Laura for the informative information. And at this time, we are sharing our contact information. Please feel free to contact Laura or myself with any questions you may have. At this stage, I will pass this to our marketing coordinator to conclude the webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Right. Thank you to our speakers, and thank you everyone for attending. Please remember to complete the short survey prompted at the close of this webinar. A copy of the PowerPoint slides and a recording of today's webinar will be made available to all attendees via email within the next few hours, and it will also be available on our Insights section of our website. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be here, and I hope everyone has a great September.